How's it going, Andrew?
What's going on, Matt? I'm back again, baby.
You're back. Where the heck have you been? I mean, I know, but our listeners don't.
Well, to my listeners, sorry for being away, but you know what? Sometimes it's nice to take a break for me anyways. For 2 weekends in a row, like long weekends, so leaving on like a Wednesday night or leaving on Thursday, 2 weekends before this one when Matt was up in
Watoma.
I was going to say Toma, so thank you for catching it. In Watoma, which I passed actually on my way. I passed Toma, not Watoma. Anyways, I had to drive out to Minnesota to officiate a wedding.
Ooh.
Which went super well. I now have like 3 people who want me to do their wedding. And I did notice I was talking to my officiant, former officiant, who is a brother.
Mm-hmm.
But this is before I even knew him as a brother. I just thought I'd seen him around. Why so many Masons are officiants. Jan Talaga does officiancies.
Yep.
So does Russell. And there's so many people. I was like, Masonry and officiancy. There's a secret story here. Whereas lots of Masons, I was like, it's a ritual. You talk in front of people. You have a memorized thing.
Right.
So I think it lends well to people who are Masons to do officiant work, which is fun. So I did that, and then I came back, and then I had 3 days back, and then immediately went to Chicago for a bachelor party.
Nice. How was that? I'm assuming exhausting and painful.
It gets to a point when you start bachelor partying on a Thursday that it becomes work by Friday, and then it becomes work through Saturday, and then on Sunday you just go home and sleep for 2 days. So it was fun. St. Patrick's Day.
Right.
You know, I didn't even get to see the Green River.
Oh.
That's kind of the reason I was there, but we just never found it in time.
Yeah. Well, you drank Malort, though.
A lot of it.
Ugh.
We were at this shuffleboard place, and it was like you bought a cabana.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like $100 a person, but it's all you can drink. And I thought they were going to be like a lot of these places, but they're kind of stingy where they try to use tactics so you don't get all you can drink.
Right.
They kept coming out like, shots. You guys want shots? You got another drink? You want another drink? And I was like, oh my God. So then I had like 6 cocktails in an hour. And then 4 shots of Malort, and that was about a wrap. So
yeah, that's a little quick, and Malort's gross. So
got through it. I mean, after all the, you kind of you're in Chicago. You got to go with the vibe.
Yeah. I don't understand how they drink it, but they're from Chicago, which is the first mistake. Sorry to our Illinois listeners. So you're going to do a little side work officiating weddings, huh?
I mean, so I was talking to some other people, and I was like, so the standard going rate for a lot of officiants is like $300 to $500.
Nice.
And so some of that goes into fees. So you have to pay like maybe $100 in fees for like turning in the certificate, all that stuff. So you're taking some of that out. Then you got to take the gas out if you're going to a place.
Right.
But still, you're making like $200 to $300 overhead just to do and honestly, best weddings. You really want the actual ceremony itself to be like 15 minutes. Like you really don't want it to drag too far. If there's readings and other stuff, it can go a little bit longer. But I've been to ones where they're like 45 and you're like, dude, this is too much. This is not a Catholic wedding. Don't need to go this long.
Yep.
Mine was probably with the whole procession in and out, 15
Yours was
minutes.
Fast. Yeah, it was good. Yours was in that sweet spot. It was perfect.
So you're getting paid $300 for like 15 minutes of work. I mean, there is work at home where you're prepping and like writing and trying to make it personal and meeting with them. But really, I'm like, dude, this is kind of a good gig. I'm kind of thinking about it.
Sounds like a good side hustle to fund some of the podcast expenses.
Yeah, I mean, all expenses go to Time for Fellowship. It's charity work, really.
Right. You know, just throwing it out there. Well, I think we've chit-chatted enough. We should probably get into our topic here for today. Now that you're back into practice and got a feel for these new, beautiful microphones.
They feel nice. And in the words of Batman, justice.
Loosen up your ties and roll up your sleeves. It's time for Fellowship with Matt and Andrew. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or any appended body.
After hearing your Batman voice, I'm a little bit more comfortable with Christian Bale's.
Why don't you give me your best Batman voice? No, I need to hear it. You got
never in a million years,
dude. You got to do one for one.
Not on a microphone. Never in a million years.
Harvey Dent. Can we trust him?
Again, I'll take Christian Bale, and he's like my least favorite voice.
So today's topic is going to be justice, and this is a bit of a heady one. Matt's going to try to temper me a little bit because I can get way too in the weeds on this, so he's going to hold me back a little bit.
Oh no, that might be a little difficult. You're pretty amped up today. It's been a while since you've been on the show, so you got a lot of energy going.
I'm very caffeinated, and I have a passion for justice. So to start us off, like we kind of did in the last couple ones, I think probably the best way for us to handle this is to start with a little bit of a high-level discussion of what justice is, how it relates to Masonry, and then we'll bring it back down to the practical. Why does this matter? Is this just a thing that we need to care? Why do we care?
Right.
Kind of stuff. So the definition I got for justice, actually, I think you have a good one. Can you give me your definition?
Which one? That first sentence we were talking about?
Yep.
Justice is that standard or boundary of right, which enables us to render to every man his just due without distinction.
And so if you really unpack that sentence, all it's really saying is, it comes down to do unto others as you'd want to do unto yourself.
Right.
It's literally a square. It's a square of virtue, the act upon the square, do others, like give everyone their due. But the cool thing with justice is it applies on the higher and like the more personal level. So we all know that like within Masonry, we talk about being a good person within our country. That's a form of justice, and that's called general or legal justice. So that means you have to be a lawful person, right?
Right.
So that means every person, the idea of where justice comes from is that every person, no matter how individualistic they are, they cannot escape but being a part of a greater whole. So even if you're like, I don't do anything, but you're a member of a country, you're born in a place, you're under the laws of that place, that greater body.
Right.
So there's basically three types of justice where this kind of, let's shrink it down. You have the whole applying to the part. So that would be your government applies laws to you. And as an up and just man, you try to abide by the laws of the land and be a good and faithful subject. Then you have distributive justice, which is what the government or the church or the fraternity or whatever bigger body owes to its individuals. So it's a social contract.
Right.
And then it comes down to where I think it's really helpful for Masons, which is called commutative justice. Think of a community, which is your part to part. So your individual to one guy to another versions of justice.
Well, that's a lot to unpack. I'm glad you're the smart one on this podcast.
So, really, at first it sounds kind of overwhelming because even when I was looking this up and studying it, I was like, this is kind of a lot. It comes actually very natural because this is something we all already do. So what's helpful is when you think about it, it sounds complicated, but it all falls back into giving them their due.
Right.
So you can use examples of that, like you owe taxes. Okay. It sucks. We hate it, but we owe them their due. So a just person would say, yeah, this sucks, but I'm not going to avoid what I am owed because you owe them because they've done something for you. So there's an exchange. You have roads, you have mail, you know what I mean? So there's some sort of transaction happening between one another. And when it comes to personal ones, where I think it's more helpful as a Mason, that can relate to commercial deals. Are you giving someone a fair price?
Right.
Or are you purposely screwing someone over, for lack of a better words? So when you start to think about how to be a just man, it's always in a situation having the empathy to put yourself in someone else's shoes and saying, the way I'm acting in my outward towards another, is it fair? Is it correct?
Right. So justice is actually one of those virtues that's very, very variable and dependent on, it changes from situation to situation depending on the circumstances.
Oh, yeah. And not only does it change based on circumstance, context, situation, like what one person is due at one time is not what that same person might be due at another based on the situation that justice is being applied to. And what makes that interesting is, so on our last episodes, we were talking about temperance and fortitude. Those are the applied inward. Those are working on yourself. Mm-hmm. Justice is when anytime any of your actions go into the world and affect another being, person, or thing, now there's an opportunity to apply justice. If you're a farmer and you destroy so much land that it starts to cause, soil erosion and stuff like that, you weren't giving the land its due and you were taking too much. So you can apply it to very personal situations, but also very abstract. Anything that being a human, your will can apply and cause an effect to is where
Yeah.
you need to take justice into account.
All right. That makes sense.
I warned you it's heady.
Yeah, I'll have a headache by the end of this episode, but it'll be all right.
But so I guess if we're trying to think of a way now to take that very high level, justice is all these things. In Masonry, we talk about justice quite a bit. It's actually sprinkled through a lot of our stuff. Like I was just saying, to be a quiet and peaceful subject, that's a form of justice.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's sprinkled in how you're supposed to deal with your brothers who may have misstepped and stuff like that. Is it admonish with justice? Is that the line I'm looking for?
Another line
No,
within...
admonish with candor. Reprehend with justice.
Yep.
There we go.
So reprehension is a huge one in the justice argument where they go, every misstep of justice requires reprehension of some sign, or retribution.
Right.
At like not like retribution, like, yeah, get him, but like the broader term, like if someone missteps, it always requires a response to balance the scales of justice. So when you go reprehend with justice, they're like, you got to fix this and reprehend, but fairly, with due bounds.
Right, and always do it fairly. Now that you brought up the scales of justice, before we forget and end up throwing it in at the end as a castaway like we did with temperance, what, as we've talked about with both fortitude and temperance, what's the symbol or whatever, what were we calling it? Were you calling it the symbol or the statue or whatever that represents justice? Yeah.
The symbol or statue that represents justice is once again a woman, and she is usually blindfolded, but not always, and she's holding a scale in one hand and a sword in the other. So the blindness, meaning that one misstep you can do in justice is giving justice to one person, but not another based on some arbitrary value, whether that might be like, oh, he's a very popular, like this is Brad Pitt. Why would I ever punish him?
Right.
Compared to somebody who could do the exact same thing who's a Joe Smo. And you're like, it doesn't apply here, but it applies here. So ideally, justice is blind.
Right.
Meaning what is the rules or what is good behavior should apply across the board.
It should be equitable.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the scales, meaning you need to balance your actions to say fairness. You need to make sure that you're within giving people their due, that you're not off your kilter.
The punishment fits the crime.
Yep. And then the sword is the ability to
carry out the sentence.
Make sure that you have the ability to apply justice where it needs to be applied. And so I love that symbol, and I think it is a powerful symbol because it captures it pretty well on what it should do. But we've all seen where justice can fall short.
I mean, people are involved, right? When it comes down to justice, you have people involved, and nobody's perfect, and we're all rough ashlers. And anytime you have people involved in a system or striving for one of these virtues, we're fallible. So there's going to be problems with it. It's never going to work exactly how it's supposed to.
Well, and then with the action of greed, you'll find that people are like, I know I'm taking more than my due. I'm not giving them their due, but I'm more concerned about my due. So,
right.
I don't care.
Greed really becomes a crux for all of these cardinal virtues. It's and a crux for humanity. Honestly, that's one of the worst things you can be is greedy. It causes a lot of problems.
It kind of is like the rot that kind of sneaks into every part of every facet of everything. It's just like there. And it's just creeping. Right. And it's kind of, it really throws like it's like the mold that gets into everything. And you're like, hey. And we have to deal with it even in a small organization. Like it just sneaks on in.
Yep. It's right there with humility, but greed is humility affects more yourself, and your own ego, whereas greed affects the community.
Yep. But you can be greedy yourself and then overindulge and not be temperate and stuff like that too, which can also be another sneaky internal way that greed sneaks up on you.
Very well done and personified by Gordon Gekko in, was that Wall Street, right?
Yep.
That was a great movie.
I was trying to think of ways to apply this directly to Masonry, and there was a really good one that I saw. So within justice, there's a variety of smaller, we talked about there's like smaller virtues within it.
Yeah.
And so within justice, there's two big ones that they call out, which is the virtue of veneration and the virtue of civility, which we like a lot.
Ooh, I like civility.
So the virtue of veneration applies to how do you deal with someone that you cannot escape being indebted to. So the way they break it out is religion. You're indebted to your deity or your higher power because if you hold those beliefs, then you're saying that is the reason. So you have some sort of, you're indebted to them and you're not able to pay that back. Then there's piety, which is to your government or your country. You live here, you were born here, you can really never fully pay it back because it's continuously giving, because just the nature of what the social contract is. And then there's observation, which is the due that you owe to your superiors. And so I think it's kind of fun that it relates to how within the entered apprentice charge, it talks about how to deal with your superiors
Right.
with kindness and condescension. So that's them telling you, how do you give them their due?
Right.
And so that means, so it basically kind of talks about how you need to honor, respect, and provide obedience to that chair. So with like the worshipful master, you might not always get along with the personality, but at minimum, you owe a basic level of due that you owe to the fact that they're within that position.
Right. Sorry, I'm just looking at something real quick because I'm pretty sure you didn't mean the entered apprentice charge. I am almost confident
No, it's fellow
that
craft.
you meant the fellowcraft charge. It's been a long time since I've done either of those charges.
It is the fellow craft.
That actually, nope, we're both wrong. It's the Master Mason charge.
Got there eventually, though.
Yeah. Well, your last try is either, this is going to be your right one.
We had a run in 1 in 3 chance.
1 in 3 chance. We got to 3 and we were finally right. Man, this is what happens when we don't do one together for a while. I had a thought before here. So, yeah, and there I go spilling a water bottle. That's all right.
Keep it hot.
Yeah. So when we're talking about justice here and how it applies to day-to-day life, basically what we've said through all this so far is that justice in your day-to-day life, and some of this stuff will sound familiar to Masons just from what they remember. Justice in your day-to-day life is being a good citizen, fair in your dealings with other people, law-abiding, and equitable if you're in a position where you have the ability to reprehend with justice.
Yep. I think that'd be a good way to boil it down to some of its smaller bits. And the nature of it, because it's so complex, it can kind of get in the weeds in a lot of different ways. But at its heart, it's just the same concept being applied to various levels of interactions between things. And it's just, finding a way to be fair and do it correctly. And if someone's, someone's been murdered, then it's like it's complicated. We're like, okay, so justice needs to happen here. But suddenly that's where it starts to get complex on what justice means in each situation. But it's kind of still following that same core structure of like, something has been done that was unjust. How do we bring the scale back to what's the appropriate response to that injustice?
Right. And that's where you can start walking down that rabbit hole of like an eye for an eye. Or,
That's the basic form. That's how it kind of started, where humans thought it was like, well, you take life, I take life. And then later they're like, well, now it's more complicated, but that's law study. You know what I mean?
Right. But that's a rabbit hole that goes off of this whole thing, is what is appropriate justice? Like, where is that? And obviously that's something people disagree about to this day with all the debates on whether or not we should have the death penalty as a option, and as we saw the removal of putting people in the stocks in the public square.
Yep. There's been various things that they thought were appropriate punishes for appropriate punishments for appropriate crimes, and that's a lifelong debate that'll always be going on as long as people are around. But what's more interesting in that is when you're dealing with things that are higher than yourself, such as like that are bigger than the individual, deity, the government, your leaders, where they have a heightened position that requires different etiquette to give them their due, and they owe you their due as well. The cool stuff gets into when you start to deal with what do you do when you have to give due bounds or give their due to anybody. So any single other person. Right. And that's where it comes in, the virtue of civility.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to enjoy this. So they break civility into a handful of different parts.
Okay.
Which is gratitude.
Yep.
Vindication. Truth, affability, and liberality. So just to quickly break those into terms, then we can talk about how these apply. Gratitude is if someone does something good for you, you owe them their due, which is to thank them and show their appreciation.
Or pay the craft their wages.
And some people know what that means. Vindication is if someone wrongs you, you have the right and should confront that wrong.
Ooh, yeah.
And they had a great line that I read. They go, healthy anger can be appropriate. They go, there is a time where you can't just say, I'm going to be a punching bag. It's not being a just person to be a punching bag.
Right.
But it's to apply justice on when it needs to.
Well, and let's talk about that for a minute. Within civility, we should all know that civility basically means dealing with people in an appropriate manner, right? So healthy anger, I feel like that's a very interesting way to put it, because it's okay to be angry when somebody wrongs you.
And let them know.
And let them know that you're angry and upset about it. It's a matter of how you communicate it.
And how much.
Right, which will determine whether it's civil or not.
Or if it's just.
Right? If you go in there screaming in somebody's face, that might be borderline unhealthy anger, and most likely is if you're just doing nothing but name calling and stuff like that. But if you're able to express, you really pissed me off when you did that, and here's why, and you lay out a logical, solid argument, that's handling it in a healthy anger, civil sort of way.
And it's actually unfair to them to do something wrong and not have a pushback, because then now you're actually building a habit with them to wrong more people. And a lot of times, like we've said, people are actually unaware sometimes that they had done something wrong. So it's important to society that we check one another in an appropriate way. So like if someone wrongs you in your immediate response, like let's say they cut you off in traffic and that's annoying, and then you got out and beat the crap out of them, you say, that was not a just act. You go,
right. Yeah, that was a little extreme.
You did have the right to be like, hey, dude, that was too much. You shouldn't do stuff like that. You have the right to get vindication and to let them know, hey, you stepped out of line, and that's an important way to be civil. But there is a line to say that justice asks you to find the appropriate amount to apply to that.
Right, which is perfect. I mean, if somebody's misstepping, somebody needs to push back at them at some point, because that goes back to, you give somebody an inch, they take a mile, right? If nobody is confronting a person about their bad behavior, nothing's ever going to happen with it, and the behavior is probably just going to get worse.
Yeah, and that's a disservice to them.
Right. And if you handle it inappropriately, you'll probably make them stronger in their position, and the same result will happen. But if you find a way to deal with it appropriately, you have a better shot of having a resolution that the outcome of would be good, which would be justice.
Yep. And then, so some ways that you can step out of line in justice, which I think this is going to come to a good point, is so when it comes to person-to-person problems, Masonry talks about all the things you shouldn't do. Murder,
right?
hobby, theft, bodily injury, as long as it's not in anger, and robbery. And so then it talks about personal, like word stuff. So they say reviling, which is publicly humiliate them or dishonor them.
Right.
Backbiting, secretly dishonoring them.
Ooh.
Telltaling, which is gossiping. And derision, which is mockery, and then cursing. So what's interesting is so the Masonry goes, okay, what's the best way to get vindication and to try to tell someone they have misstepped? And so they're basically telling you, hey, don't dishonor them publicly. Don't just go and backbite behind their back. Go and whisper wise counsel.
Right. Don't stab them in the back. Let them, if you're going to say something to them about it, say it to their face. Don't say it to other people.
And say it privately so that you can maintain their honor, but also have the best chance of trying to get the desired resolution. And then don't go and just gossip about them and kind of ruin their reputation with others and like ruin their friendships because you're just bad-mouthing. And I think that especially in any group, you can look at that on the big scale. It's not good for a city if everyone's backbiting, but in a smaller group like a fraternity, it can be very destructive if not justice isn't done.
It can be very destructive, and the rumor mill and backstabbing and stuff like that happens all the time, and we've all been caught up in it at some point in our life, whether we were on the giving or the receiving end. It's just bound to happen sometimes, and sometimes so that you don't violate one of those other ones, you don't have unhealthy anger. Sometimes you just need to vent to somebody, which I think people need to understand there's a difference between you stabbing somebody in the back and you saying to your friend, man, Andrew really pissed me off the other day, and just kind of getting it off your chest, and then maybe going back and handling it with Andrew in a more appropriate manner now that you've, calmed down about it.
Well, and usually when it comes to the difference between backbiting and venting is backbiting has ill intention a lot of the time. Like, you're just like, dude, look at that. Like, a lot of the time it's for the purpose of putting them down to lift yourself up. It's the ego showing its head. So it'll be like, God, do you see how that schmutz was dressed today? I can't believe him. And you're like, yeah, okay, you're patting yourself on the back. It's a humble brag. You're pushing him down. I think you can tell when, and you'll find that someone who's a notorious backbiter will tell not just one person, like, I just need to vent to someone to get this off my chest to prepare myself to go have this conversation because I'm having unhealthy anger right now.
Right.
I want to go and vent so I can bring it to healthy so that I know how to address the conversation compared to just doing it to put someone down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's critical.
So the next part of civility is truth. And so we all know that means being honest, but there's another part to this that I thought was really interesting, and that means you should try to, it's a virtue, and you are not doing your mind or the other person their due by not accurately depicting what is in your mind.
Right.
So the point of speech is to make your mind come to their mind. And they say, as a civil person, you have to find a way to express your truth, but in a way that is appropriate, and saying it's unjust to say, let's say you see something happening and you just go, I know this is wrong and I have an opinion on this, but I'm just going to keep it to myself. You're not doing a good service to the world by saying, I'm just going to keep that inside. It doesn't mean tell everyone what you think about everything all the time, like I do. It means, it just means...
Do you do that?
It means be honest and straightforward and tell the truth.
Right. And, the truth is one of those tricky things. And usually where these kind of conversations with somebody can start to break down, because in any situation, there's three truths. There's your truth, there's their truth, and there's the truth.
Yep. And I mean, the key is that if you never give your truth and you only hear their truth, you're not going to have a dialogue enough to find the truth.
Right. And, but the sticking point usually becomes when my truth doesn't match up with your truth. And this is the part that can be sticky to navigate, and to a certain extent where you have to be able to be willing to give the ground to maybe concede your point a little bit into, we're going to have to agree to disagree a little bit.
Yep. And that's a wise point, meaning that at least in your current motion, you're unable to find common ground. And at that point, it's better to move on to something else, because it doesn't mean there wasn't a resolution there. It just might mean in that moment, you're not going to find it. And the key with truth is, if you move on to the next civility point, it's affability. Is to find the truth, you need to have affability. And affability is a line that we use in Masonry that means render the friendliness due to another. And we kind of talked about this in the Master Mason Charge episode about universal benevolence and friendliness.
Mm-hmm.
So within all of these civil things, friendliness should be behind the scenes.
Wow.
And it means that be friendly to all. And like, if you think about it, okay, you go to Taco Bell and there's two different types of people. There's someone who's like, hey man, how you doing? What can I get you today? And there's people like, what do you want? And you're like, this sucks. This is a bad interaction.
Right.
And that having a friendly demeanor is to everyone's benefit, including yourself.
Well, and I mean, it's straight up in the charge before the universal benevolence part, where it's in dealing with all your inferiors, your equals, and your superiors. It's in dealing with your equals, courtesy and affability.
Yep, it's right there in your face, because this is what this is all talking about. This is how you deal with these people who are just people. And they're not less, they're not more, they're just your guys.
Right.
Friendly. Just be friendly. And within that friendly comes a general state of just empathy, which is a big part of justice too, is just to be like, put yourself in their shoes. So if you're having a truthful conversation and you guys are maintaining a level of respect and friendliness, that's the only way these dialogues can work to find that third truth.
Right. Well, and it's the only way these dialogues can work, period, to get to a resolution. Because when it devolves into a shouting match or a name calling match or anything like that, like we see online all too commonly, then the ability for you guys to bridge the gap has been lost.
You burned the bridge.
Yep. You burnt the bridge. You at least made it for at least a short period of time, if not an extended period of time, that there is going to be no repairing it. And so you need to take that into consideration. If you really, truly want to end up resolving something, you need to come at it with civility.
Yep. And with affability and friendliness.
Right.
So the final, now this is going to be where it gets deeply Masonic. The final virtue or sub-description carried within civility is liberality. And what that means is it renders the modest generosity due to others. And I saw a good quote where they said, too much bread stored gets rotten.
Mm.
And basically the point is that a civil person has a generous spirit. They're more willing to give than to receive. And so we always say within due bounds and not to your own, what's the word we use? To give as liberally as you can without material injury to yourself.
Mm.
And so with the material injury to yourself, they're saying you shouldn't be like, I'm going to give everything away, but they're saying you should have a loose hand where you're just like willing to always help within what is appropriate and just to say, I'll buy this round today, boys, and not expect to be like, I need my ledger to be accurate, just be like a generous person. And Masonry does that quite a bit and is inculcated in a lot of our teachings is to give back to others in the community and to one another.
Well, and I think one of the keys in that whole philosophy is the without material injury part. Help other people and do what you can to help other people, but don't let it bring you down in your personal life, right? And why do we do that? Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of others.
Yeah, and the whole point is when it says, by the way, the word is modest generosity. They put that right in there. They're like, it doesn't mean just give away everything. It means just, don't be stingy. Like, don't be a guy who's always just trying to make sure that when he gives someone else their due, he's like, well, where's my due? And you're like, no, it's to just give for the sake of saying, I want everyone around me and society as a whole. I'm willing to be the hand that gives, not the hand that takes.
Right, for sure.
That's
I lost my train of thought right there. Sorry.
But I think that Masonry does a good job. Even when I was listening to your guys' last podcast with the Ethan Klima talking about how whenever he personally sees a homeless person, he doesn't give money, but he always has something in his lunchbox. That would be modest generosity, where you're like, I'm not breaking my back, but I'll give you a beef jerky. And you're like, nice.
And that's
helpful.
Honestly a good strategy to go with too, because if you just give them money, you don't know where it's going.
Yeah, and so that is the just way to handle it. You know what I mean? And that's the just way to try to help. And in Masonry, we try to always be active in our communities and to help charities and to do, the dyslexia centers and all this good stuff. And so as an organization, as individual Masons, I think it comes very naturally to us to have modest generosity, which is a good and just virtue.
Yeah, and modest is a key point, because with the areas I work in, doing the job I do, if I gave something to everybody who asked me for something throughout the day, I'd have nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just find a way to give back in your own accord, into responsibility. So I think we've beat what justice is to death. So let's bring it down and talk about how do we actually practically apply. How can we learn some justice skills? Because I think a lot of this is pretty heady, where it's just like, be good to people. But what are some actual things we can do?
Just bust out the sword and start swinging.
That sounds like... So one interesting thing I found is they say, educate yourself on the rules of the land or the rules of the organization you are a member of.
Ooh.
So that means if you're trying to find a practical way to know more about how to be just in Masonry, Code Correspondence course.
Yeah, that's a big one. A lot of people have been talking about the Code Correspondence course lately. And if you haven't done the Wisconsin Masonic Code Correspondence course, I would highly suggest it.
Yep. And then the Constitution and bylaws of your lodges, because you can't act justly if you don't actually know what the rules are.
Right.
So you can't actually protect and act justly within an organization if you don't actually know what you're trying to be just about.
Well, I mean, if you don't know what the rules are, how are you supposed to follow them? And part of justice, as we discussed, is following the rules.
Yep. And then part of justice is trying to stop other people from breaking the rules. And if you don't have that competency, that's where you see innocent mistakes where someone's like, oh, I just didn't actually know. And, that's where it's important to make sure that as a just person, the minimum or the basics of the laws of the land, or else, you'll just be like, it'd be like if you're walking down the street, hammered and with a bottle of beer in your hand, a cop pulls you over and you're like, what are you doing right now? And you're like, well, it's my life. And you're like, okay, I'm just partying. And then like, no, that's against the rules. It's a disservice to not only cause harm for yourself because you can get in trouble. You can't act justly without knowing what the rules are.
Well, and ignorance of the rules is not an excuse for having violated the rules.
It's rarely, you still were unjust, even if you were ignorant to the justice. It's, as any upstanding citizen and upstanding Mason, it's important to know the rules that are bound to you by both organizations.
Exactly.
The next thing I found that I think you're going to like a lot is called focus local.
Ooh.
So they say justice is in the details of your community. And they said, do not engage on online activism. It is a waste of your time, and it doesn't actually cause any benefits. They say focus on small things at the local level to actually apply justice to your community, helping your community. And one way I found that was interesting is something as simple as picking up litter.
Yeah. And we're going to do a park cleanup project this year, which I'm kind of excited about. And I will to touch on another point in there, which we've probably beaten to death over the course of now 27 episodes, which, woohoo, 27 episodes. Ooh. Is the whole online activism thing. You know, I tried for a while. I thought I was being that guy that could change people's minds by typing a bunch of words in response to their comment that made no sense or was flat out wrong. And you know what? That's right. You can't. You're not going to get, that's not the right venue for it.
And especially in the position that you're in. And if you think of justice as the perpetual and constant will to render one another their due, that means what is your will actually able to accomplish?
Right.
And if your will is like, I want to change the entire world by posting about global warming, you're like, your will is literally incapable of actually accomplishing this based on what your position is. You should actually focus that effort locally. If you're like, I want to see more of green stuff, it's like, what can your community do about that? Can you help start a garden? Can you do something that's beneficial in the local level? Because that's a better use of your time for whatever you believe in.
Right. Well, it's a better use of your time and effort because you can either sit there and, type back and forth for hours with a total stranger on some social media platform, then you're never going to change their mind and they're never going to change your mind. And you guys are probably going to start name calling each other and it's just going to be ugly and whatnot and everything else. Or you could take those 3 hours of time that you spent doing that, which had zero net positive and probably a negative result on your life, and go outside instead and plant some flowers or plant a tree or whatever the situation is, help in a soup kitchen, go talk to your alderman and actually, get some concerns raised or, be active in your local government, like much better uses of time than having who can type faster contest with somebody else online.
Yeah, a basically what we'd call hot air online. Yeah, and I thought that was empowering in the way that's like, think small because that's where you're going to make the biggest impact.
Yep.
Other options are practice empathy. I think we beat that to death. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Act justly. So arbitrary it's useless. Speak up. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Advocate your truth and don't let people get away with breaking the rules and just saying, I think we talked about that in the one of the charges where it's like you're not supposed to sweep it under the rug and just pretend it's not there. You have an obligation if you're trying to practice justice to stand up for justice.
Right. No, and that is talked about. I believe is that in the Master Mason charge right away? I believe it might be that about not sweeping it under the rug. And, that's a good point is it's hard, right? It's hard to be the person that's trying to exercise justice. It's hard to be that person when nobody else is speaking up to speak up about a situation that's wrong. That's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a lodge setting, that's difficult.
And they call that moral courage.
Right. And I think it's vastly important that we all develop that as a skill, which shockingly enough goes back to fortitude a little bit, because if you're, mentally tough and strong and have the principle of fortitude on your side, it's going to make you more likely to speak up about the wrongs that you're identifying, even if nobody else is.
Do things you don't like.
Right. Do things you don't like to do and do them for the right reason, though. That's the important thing is you can do all the things you don't like. If you're doing them for the wrong reasons, it doesn't do anything.
It's like the moment that you're building up to have the conversation and about to take the action, it's an act of fortitude. And the moment your mouth opens, it's an act of justice.
Yep. Yeah, sounds about right.
The other big ones that I kind of liked was lead by example, which we talk about a lot in Masonry. They're like, the biggest way you can impact people is be a role model.
Yep.
And by saying, if everyone in the lodge is doing something unjust and you just refuse, they're going to be, he's such a square. But other people will notice and be like, I kind of agree that at least someone is standing up for something.
Right.
And so be a role model. And the other big one is just to challenge your biases, which kind of goes into the empathy thing where it's like, hey, if you're looking at somebody and being like, I was just going to let Brad Pitt off with this crime because I like him in movies, but not Bill Bilson because I don't know that guy, that'd be a moment to say, is your justice truly blind? Or is there something behind the scenes that may have been just you're born with or preconceived notion that is tilting your scale so it's no longer balanced and you're acting not justly just because of some random belief you have over whatever it could be. It's like his shoes are untied. I don't like that guy. I'm going to be harsher to him. And you're like, okay.
Right. And I love the example you're using, but that's not like our most real world example, right? Our most real world example, and without just flat out saying it, is
not being on the level.
No, I was going to go with is the internal, not the external qualifications of a man.
Yep. And I mean, it's like how we always say in Masonry that we try to treat men, no matter of creed, socioeconomic status, job, race, religion, we try to look at them all as equals. That's where that comes as a Mason checks his bias, where it's like, I'm going to treat this man as a man.
Yep.
And that's it. And I'm going to give him his due based on the fact that I'm a man, he's a man, or whoever. He's a person, I'm a person. We are going to make sure that we are being just in giving them their due. And that's a hard thing to do. I mean, we all fall into that. No one's perfect at that.
It's an extremely difficult thing to do. But I also think that's the perfect point to end this episode about justice on.
So if we wanted to, we got to give them our last thoughts.
All right.
Start with you.
No. You go first.
All right. My last thought on justice is it comes back to mindfulness. It's just, I think it's important just to reflect because there's a lot of decisions that we make that are just impulse based. You get, someone says something and you snap right back. You just do this. And a lot of it is just action reaction. And the key to justice is the ability to either catch yourself. And if you don't catch yourself, to reflect and go, there was probably a better way and a more just way to do it. And then since you owe them their due, you apologize because that's them giving their due, and try to keep your scales balanced, and just be a good guy, be fair, and mind your square.
I think my final take on this is going to be that it takes fortitude and temperance to reprehend with justice in a civil manner, and I'll let people unpack that themselves.
Oh, you guys might have forgot, but it's time for news and events. All right, we're back at it again with some news.
Yeah, sorry about that. I kind of got lazy about news and events. Well, I'll never do them for Matt Travels because that's just too much when I'm on location somewhere else. But
honestly, sometimes it takes time for the news to renews. So now we got some more news. So what's been going on in Wisconsin? So Masonic Light Lodge actually assisted with Healing Patriot, which is another group. So 3 Crivets Freemasons actually attended a fundraiser for Healing Patriots on February 2nd and actually presented a check for $500. So what that is this was a 2-day event that was held at the community center in Peshtigo. I know I said that wrong. Sorry. Peshtigo Brothers.
Here we go with the mispronouncing of small towns.
So
Peshtigo's not all that small.
In Peshtigo, the Healing Patriots is actually a nonprofit group for volunteers that's dedicated to helping veterans and first responders, help them with their struggles with PTSD and mental health issues. So it has this trauma center and a bunch of other really good stuff, and this is a great donation to support our veterans and first responders, which is awesome.
Now it's my turn to struggle with pronunciation. So Prairie View Lodge did a stein tossing competition. I'm going to guess that it's not Knuth. I'm going to guess it said like knife, and it's Knuth Brewing Company, microbrew in Ripon, held the grand opening celebration for their new building on February 17th, and part of that grand opening was, at owner Dave Knuth's request, a stein tossing competition was held by the lodge. A stein tossing is similar to the stone throw the lodge presents at Ripon Fest each summer, except instead of throwing large boulders, the contestants throw medicine balls. It was a great fundraiser for Prairie View, as well as tremendous exposure to the community. So it sounds like they had a lot of fun tossing some medicine balls around.
Dude, that's fun. So moving on to events. Let's start with March. There's not a lot left in March, but we have one event left going on in March that I'm aware of, which is going to be the Valley of Madison is doing their Feast of the Paschal Lamb. So if you're a Scottish Rite Mason, this is a really cool event. I know they put it on, I think, once a year.
Yep.
But it's a cool event to get back with the Valley. Speaking of the Valley of Madison, from the 5th through the 7th, they have a really cool event called...
We're on to April now. The Feast of the Paschal Lamb is on March 28th, which is the day this episode comes out, by the way.
Yeah, so if you don't know, go. And then in April, we have the 5th through the 7th. They're doing a presentation of the Native Spirit at the Wisconsin Masonic Center. So this is going to have, it's $35 a ticket. They're going to have a variety of cultural dances and stores and all sorts of cool stuff honoring the First Nations peoples. On April 11th, there is the first annual District 7 Masonic Trivia and Brewing Contest. So this is a double dipper. So the trivia contest is going to be held by the Brethren of District 7 and the surrounding districts. And it sounds like they're trying to make this an annual deal. They're going to have food, fellowship, libations, and a chance to test their Masonic knowledge. So a cool trivia competition, very much about Masonry, which is really fun. And then on top of that, there's a brewing contest. They know there's plenty of brethren who brew beers, and I think we all know that. Brewing beers and smoking meat are a big Mason hobby. So they're challenging all home brewers to showcase their passion for brewing and help raise money for a great cause. You need to brew the equivalent of a case, 2.25 gallons of beer, in an ice cooler, and attendees will have the opportunity to sample the beers throughout the evening. And there will be an award for first, second, and third place and medals based on the votes cast by the brethren.
Honestly, this sounds like an awesome event. I really wish it wasn't the same night as our stated meeting.
Dude.
Otherwise, I would totally go.
What's not to like? Trivia and homebrewed beer.
Right.
Amazing.
Exactly.
On April 13th, District 5 is having their spring meeting. It's going to have pancakes and their social hour from 7 a.m. to 9. So pancakes, coffee, 9 to 11. The actual meeting itself at Sparta Masonic Center. Also on the 13th, we're going to be having the Masonic Acts of Kindness Gala fundraiser. That's going to be right here at Lake Masonic Center. Do you have any more details on that? I know you...
Let me pull up the flyer here real quick. To be appetizers at 5 o'clock, dinner at 6. The comedians should start around 7:15. The dinner menu is roast New York stripped, bacon wrapped pork loin, chicken, something I can't say, Thai chili shrimp, Thai chili chicken, and sides with a bunch of desserts. It is $45 a person, $80 a couple, or $280 for a table of 8. If you are interested in coming, feel free to email us at timeforfellowship@gmail.com, and I will get you the Eventbrite link. Otherwise, the flyers should be out there in the hands of all the DDs in the state, as well as all the secretaries in District 12. And yeah, so that information should be available.
Yep, and this is a great event. I know there's still tables open, so if you are interested, it's a great opportunity to raise money for the Acts of Kindness program, and there's going to be some really cool raffles as well.
Oh yeah, the proceeds from this are going to the Grandmaster's Appeal for the most part, which is the Children's Dyslexia Centers.
As someone who's dyslexic, this is near and dear to my heart. On to the 18th, we have our soup and chili night here at Lake Lodge, and we are going to be doing soup flights. They're very delicious, and we have a lot of good cooks here, so definitely an event worth checking out.
Well, and it sounds like we're going to have like 8+ different soups and chilies this time, and flights of 4 are what, $10?
Yep, flights of 4 cups are $10, and then you can do individual bowls for $3.
Right, mix and match whatever soups you want. That'll start at 5:30 right at the Lake Masonic Center.
Yep, and you can have it here to go. On the 20th, Silas Shepherd, 1843, Lodge Research, and James M. Hayes Lodge, 331, it will be presenting a play entitled In Defense of the Ruffians. So this is a really cool play. Coffee and carbs start at 9 a.m., gavels at 10 a.m., and that's going to be at the, what's that center?
Northwest Masonic Center.
Northwest Masonic Center. On the 24th, the Valley of Madison Scottish Rite is doing their spring reunion. That's going to be the 4th, 14th, and 16th degrees. Continues to the 27th for the spring reunion, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 32nd degrees.
On April 29th, the District 12 spring meeting will be held. Check your district mailer for more information. I believe it's at Nico's Pizzeria this time, and RSVPs are going to be required for that. So you can always reach out to District Deputy Jeremy Koss for more information. Also on April 29th, Ozaki Lodge number 17 is having a table lodge and fish boil. Starts at 5:30 p.m. Gathering at 5:30. They're gonna open a lodge of table instruction at 6. $25 a person. All Masons are welcome. Reservations are due by April 25th. To Worshipful Master Schroeder out there. On April 30th, the Education Committee will be having another symposium, which was an excellent thing that they did over Zoom last time, where you could type in questions and stuff like that. The login information will be out about a week before. The topic's going to be the Morgan Affair, and it starts at 7 p.m. And hot off the presses, I just started seeing it get posted on Facebook today. On Friday, May 3rd, Wisconsin 13 Lodge is going to have a trivia night. It'll be $10 for a team of 4. That includes some refreshments. Doors open at 6. Games start at 6:30. There will be prizes for first and second place and best team name. For further information, you can email the Worshipful Master at Wisconsin 13 Lodge, and that will be held at the Brookfield Masonic Center.
Yep, and that'll be Dan Pappas. Cool. And that is events.
All right, excellent. Well, Andrew, it's been great having you back.
Yep, good to be back, and I will try not to make you do as much solo running in the future.
No, it's
until,
fine.
next week or something.
I had a lot of fun, and actually our numbers did pretty well, so I can't complain.
Wait for them to plummet now.
Maybe that's a little justice.
Cool. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for your Batman impression, and I am out of here.
Have a good one.